The word narrative could be an intimidating word because when we think of a narrative, we think of Hollywood movies and these epic long stories. Whereas I look at a narrative as an accumulation of the stories, like whether you've experienced or that have influenced in your life. So, narrative is how do you control what is seen of your life and your business. And for me, that is the storytelling on thinking about your origin story. That's a great narrative tool. Your vision for the future and how your values are expressed. So when I work with people, I say, okay, like, let's not jump to a narrative or this narrative arc where you have to span your entire life. Let's think of individual moments that changed everything for you and supplant those into your personal brand.
Yeah. I think we're definitely aligned on the values approach because I think when you start from the values, that gives you a really fundamental foundation for any messages that might come from that. And I think starting with values also helps you figure out, does an idea for content actually relate to my brand, my company? I think when we think of it in terms of just like what would people be interested in or what might help people, it's really hard to then connect it to our brand. But if it comes from the values that we have as individuals and the values that our company holds, it becomes easier to figure out like, is this relevant? Is this gonna kind of help my brand flourish and help people connect with it? Or is it gonna be something that confuses people?
Yeah, and I put the defining of values very early on for personal brands because you have I try to have, 5 to 7, seven definitely a max. And you want to pick the ones that are obviously true for you, but then true for your audience as well. And to be able to align with people who have the same values. And you may have heard this before from people that you work with, but they may say like, okay, who do you work for? Or who is your audience? Who are you trying to connect with? And they go, oh, people that are trying to transform their lives for the better. And you go, well, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we can help, if we can use values, and like I said earlier, like the vision to narrow that down and go, these are the specific people we help. And the reasons why we help them is because we share these values.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that often happens with people in our community is they're coming in and they say things like, I'm really passionate about converting the science into something that is useful or informative and, making things easy for people to understand. And it's like, okay, that's good, but literally everybody wants to achieve that in this field. So how are you going to actually stand out? And so I think one thing to also think about is your differentiators and how you as an individual and you as a company are different to what other people are doing in the same field. So
Mm-hmm.
how would you suggest somebody kind of tap into some of those things? Because I think often there's this disconnect between like what does make you different when especially when it's a new field or you feel like other people have more experience than you or you're just starting out.
Yeah, so I have a few different things that I do. So we spoke about one of the like the values and then producing content that expresses those values. So for me, I'm a backcountry explorer. I climb mountains, I ski. I've been doing that my entire life. So I put little bits of that sort of content out to show like, oh, I'm this type of person in my life. So that's one way that people can connect with, oh, I identify with you. Another way is through the educational content and showing yourself as an expert in your field. And tell me if this is true or not. I've worked with a lot of scientists and researchers, and usually they want to try to put in as much information as possible. They're really excited about their fields, they're really excited about what they do, and they want to give everyone everything because they're excited about it. So, what I do with my clients is I say, okay, it's amazing that this is your field of expertise, but we have to take the level of thinking that very high level thinking and go, how do we break this down into ways that people can understand what you're talking about, and not focusing on one long video and cramming in all the information. It's okay, let's break it down, simplify them, and make it so you can communicate them clearly. And that's a and I get sucked into that sometimes. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I write content and all of a sudden it's long-winded and complex language when instead I should be doing the opposite. So do you
Hmm.
see that with people that you work with? Is that a challenge that they typically have?
Yeah, so I would say it's either one way or the other. It's either like a lot of detail, a lot of thoughts, like a really long post that probably no one has time to read, or it's basically there's no actual value attached to it. It's just like, I read this book, I recommend it, or I
Mm,
just did this course, or I just made this video, and nobody's really seeing the value that you're actually offering to them. There is no value there. Like, so I think one thing I'm always working with people on doing is like, what were the insights? Like, what were the learnings? What have you taken away from what it is that you've done that you want to share? And so it's that side of things, but then it's also, like you said, breaking it down into smaller amounts, because one idea could actually be 10 different posts very easily. But I think when you're not used to thinking about it in that way, it can seem like a foreign concept. And it's recognizing what counts as a story as well, because that's another kind of mindset shift that people need to have. For
mhm.
example, we have a lot of healthcare providers as part of our community. Some of them leave healthcare to become medical writers, some of them are still interacting with patients. But I always say to them, every single patient interaction you've ever had could become a story, because this is a direct application of a recommendation or of a guideline or of a study, on a real person who's actually trying this out and experiencing it. So that could become a story. And once you realize that, it's kind of mind blowing, because it's like, wow, there is a bigger impact of what I know. And it's figuring out what that impact is and how it's going to emotionally resonate with someone, that I think really makes stories so powerful.
Yeah, you said the perfect word there is emotions.
Hmm.
And that is at the core of every story is there needs to be emotion. There's some stories that are happy and joyous, but I think the majority of them should include a struggle or a
Hmm.
challenge that needs to be overcome. It's not just a listing of events. I have people who bring stories to me and say, "Oh, read this," and it's them recounting this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And there's a great book out there by Randy Olson. So Randy Olson was a PhD marine biologist who became a Hollywood filmmaker, actually Hollywood documentarian. And he wrote a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist. And he breaks down a story formula that he uses, which called and, but, and therefore. So to tell any story, you can use that structure. So it's a medical researcher who was working at this place and was wanting to become a resident, but they had these challenges of not seeing themselves an authority and they didn't have confidence to move forward in their field. Therefore, they studied extensively to increase their confidence to live their dreams. So that's a simple structure. That's a story right there. It included
Hmm.
the character, the situation, the challenge that had to be overcome, and then what the resolution was. So yeah, that
Yeah.
that three-word prompt I think is a great way for people to introduce storytelling into their content.